Good morning, and welcome to the second week of Faith Formation and Spirituality of Adults and Seniors. I'm going to be providing a short mini lecture on the history and cultural attitudes of aging by providing a very brief snapshot and comparison with some statistics and attitudes towards older folks in the medieval period. In general, human life expectancy has increased very significantly in the past century, century and a half especially. In many areas, life expectancy has doubled or more than doubled. However, with medical improvements, such as interventions, medical interventions, surgeries, things like that, but also better understanding of the human body in general, better understanding of nutrition and the availability of vaccinations. We are able to live much longer as human adults now. But at the same time, cultural attitudes have not necessarily kept pace with medical approaches to aging. And so some people would argue that our cultural attitudes towards aging are not better than they were 100 or 150 years ago. In fact, we've seen an increasing devaluation of aging and the elderly. A BBC article not too long ago highlighted some fairly recent research into the average lifespan of people who lived in England today compared with 700, 800 years ago. In the 13th century, the average age of an adult, the average life expectancy, was 31.3 years. Much of that, the low age, has to do with infant mortality, which was quite high at the time. So if males, for example, reached the age of 20, they were likely to reach the age of 45. That is, if they passed their childhood years, if they survived through childhood, they were likely to live into their 40s. If they passed the age of 30, they were likely to reach the age of 55. So, for example, if they passed the years where young men were more likely to be conscripted into armies or killed through homicide, then they were likely to live into their 50s. It's a similar story for women. If they survived childhood, they were likely to live into their 40s. And once they had passed their childbearing years, then they were likely to live into the 50s, and in fact had a slightly longer life expectancy than men. On the whole, childbearing for women was more dangerous than warfare for men, and a higher percentage of women died during childbearing years than men did during warfare years. Some people in this time frame did live into their 60s and 70s, and not surprising, they were valued for their wisdom and perspective that comes through age and through experience. The medieval concept of human development was a little simpler than it is today. Today, if you've studied Erikson, you'll know that there's at least 7 stages of life. Generally, in the medieval period, there were 2 stages, childhood and adulthood. And I'm sure there was recognition that there were sub-stages in here in terms of like younger children and older children, or younger adults and older adults. But in terms of categories, those are the 2 basic categories that are often presented and talked about. One of the things that poses a challenge for appreciating older folks and thinking about the wisdom that they might have is that social and especially technological changes have made it so that in many cases it's the young people now who are the experts. So at one point, young people were valued for their physical and sexual capacities, things that tended to decline as we aged. But older folks still had something to contribute to the family and to society, and that was their knowledge, their experience, their wisdom. With technological changes, it's increasingly the case that it is the young people who are the experts. So, as a 50-year-old, if I need help with my computer or some technological issue, I am more likely to approach my daughters who are in their late teens and early 20s, or my nieces who are 10 and 16. They are more likely to know the answers to some of my questions than folks like my mother or my in-laws. So this has been another loss for seniors, is the loss of being valued as sources of knowledge and wisdom. Keith Meter and Sean Henson have an essay in the Hauerwas book that is on the reserve list. The essay is called Growing Old in a Therapeutic Culture. They define late modern, our culture today, contemporary culture, as therapeutic, meaning that the whole cultural emphasis is on therapy. It is on helping us feel good, helping us be happy, taking away those things which cause us anxiety or pain, helping us cope. They observe that late modern culture treats the self as a project, and the self needs therapy. And they contrast this with an earlier, and for the purpose of this mini lecture, I will say medieval understanding of humans as sinners that need salvation. So we've moved from sinners needing salvation to selves needing therapy. The problem is that regardless of your cultural attitudes, aging still involves losses, and people still experience significant losses. And even though we have this culture of therapy, people don't always experience improvement in their life. So death is no longer embraced. The cultural attitude is to avoid the topic and to postpone the reality of death. Today, living well primarily means living longer. It doesn't mean, as it used to, mean living unto death. Our faith has also been transformed into kind of a pop spirituality, or a quirky individual set of faith or beliefs, or you might say opinions about the meaning of life and death. Meter and Henson's response is to say that we need to, as a church, as Christians, we need to reemphasize and reclaim the notion of narrative, the notion of story, the notion of each of us as persons, as children of God, who have a place in this larger story of God's creation. And in this story is the reality that death is a part of life. Death isn't the end of life, it's part of the process of life. And that this is something that we need to embrace. So we're moving from a therapeutic hope, a hope that I will get better, to a Christian hope that embraces life, which includes embracing life, suffering, death, and Christian resurrection. And in Jesus, we have a model for this, of somebody who lived, suffered, died, and was resurrected. And it's this Christian hope modeled in Jesus. This story of Jesus' life, death, suffering, resurrection that we need to keep telling as a church. I've become aware in recent years that in some monasteries in Europe, the monks would greet each other by saying memento mori, or remember you will die. Kind of an odd greeting. I think maybe we can reclaim this practice, but also add memento spero, which means remember hope. This is not an escapist hope, but a hope that is embodied and rooted in the life, suffering, death of Jesus Christ. I invite you to enter deeply into the readings this week, and continue your reflections in your reflection journal, the first of which is due at the end of this